My name is Caleb Ridley. I am 31 years old. I am standing in my father's backyard on Father's Day, holding a paper plate with a hamburger going cold on it, and I am watching him get ready to say something he has wanted to say to me for a long time. I can tell because of the way he sets his beer down on the porch rail. Slow, deliberate. The way a man sets something down when he wants both hands free for what comes next. The grill smoke is still hanging low over the yard, charcoal and lighter fluid, and the sweeter smell of Aunt Denise's baked beans warming on the folding table. Somewhere behind me, my cousin's kids are shrieking through a sprinkler. It is 4:40 in the afternoon, the third Sunday in June, and every single person my father has ever wanted to impress is standing in this yard. I did not know, when I got here at noon, that I had been invited as the audience. I want to tell you how we got to the moment my father looked at 20-some people he'd known his whole life and told me he never wanted a son like me. But it didn't start in that backyard, and it didn't start with the truck sitting in the driveway either, keys still warm from the ignition. It started 9 years ago, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and disappointment, on the day I told him I'd taken a job at an insurance company instead of coming to work for Ridley and Sons. He didn't yell that day. He just looked at me the way you look at a bid that's come in wrong and said, "That's not what we do," using a we that had never once, in 22 years, actually included me in the deciding. There were no sons, plural. There was just me. He named the business that way in 1994, the year I was born, like he was placing an order. My father is Gerald Ridley. He has run a small contracting outfit, decks, additions, the occasional pole barn, out of Millhaven, Ohio, for 31 years. He is the kind of man who measures other men by their hands. Are they rough? Are they scarred? Do they know what a load-bearing wall actually carries, or do they just know the word for it? My hands are not rough. I spent 4 years at Ohio State getting a degree in risk management and finance, and I have spent the 7 years since working my way up at a regional commercial fleet insurance underwriter, the kind of company that insures the trucks, cranes, and box vans that keep small businesses like his running. I started as a claims associate answering phones. I am now the senior underwriting manager for the company's construction and trades division, which is a sentence I have said out loud to my father exactly once, in 2021, and watched him nod the way you nod at something you've decided isn't worth understanding. "So you sell insurance," he said. "I underwrite commercial risk," I said. "Same thing to the guy paying the premium," he said, and went back to his newspaper. That was the whole conversation. That was, in a lot of ways, every conversation we'd had since I was 14 years old, and told him I didn't want to spend my summer on a roofing crew. He never hit me. He never screamed. My father's cruelty has always run quieter than that. A joke told at the right volume for the whole table to hear. A compliment for somebody else delivered while I was standing 3 feet away. A silence held just a beat too long after I said something I was proud of. He built an entire identity for me before I was old enough to argue with it. Soft, spoiled, not built for real work. And then he spent 3 decades finding new evidence for a verdict he'd already reached. My younger cousin Dustin, who works for Ridley and Sons and has since he was 19, got a truck for his 25th birthday. My father stood up at that party too and said Dustin was the kind of young man this family needed more of. I was 26 that year. I brought a card. I want to be clear about something because it matters for what comes later. I never stopped showing up. I went to every Father's Day. I called every Sunday. When my father's business nearly folded in 2019, a slow winter, 2 clients who didn't pay, a truck that blew its transmission at the worst possible time, I was the one who quietly helped him restructure the debt so the bank didn't take the shop. He never knew the calls I made on his behalf came from someone who understood exactly what he was looking at, because I never told him. I let him think a guy at the bank had just been decent to him. That's the kind of son I was. The kind who fixed things from a distance and let somebody else get the credit because getting credit from my father had stopped being something I expected a long time ago. I think about one afternoon in particular from when I was 12. My father was teaching Dustin, 11 at the time, already spending weekends on job sites with his own dad, my Uncle Ray, how to read a stud finder along a wall in our garage. I stood in the doorway and asked if I could try. My father handed it to me without looking up, let me hold it against the drywall for maybe 4 seconds, and then took it back and gave it to Dustin instead. Some things you're either born knowing or you're not, he said, to no one in particular, in the tone of a man stating a fact of nature. I went inside and read for the rest of the afternoon. I remember thinking, very clearly for a 12-year-old, he's already decided what I am. I didn't have the words for it then. I have them now. What he decided was a boy who wasn't built for anything that mattered, and every year after that, he simply collected proof. By the time I was 16, I'd stopped bringing home report cards for him to sign because a 4.0 got a nod and AB in gym class got a lecture about focus. By 19, I'd stopped correcting him when he told other men at church that I was still figuring out what I wanted to do, even after I'd already declared my major and landed my first internship. By 25, I'd stopped expecting him to ask a single follow-up question about my job, ever, for any reason. You don't notice the exact day you give up on being seen by someone. You just notice, one day, that you've built an entire adult life around not needing them to. The truck is the part you need before I tell you what happened at 4:41 that afternoon. 2 years ago, my father's F-250, the one Ridley and Sons had run since before I graduated college, died on the side of Route 9 with a cracked block. He needed a replacement fast, mid-project, 3 jobs backed up. His credit was still bruised from 2019. No bank would touch him for a commercial loan without a cosigner, and the dealership wanted a personal guarantee on the lease. I did what I always did. I made a call. Except this time, because of what I do for a living, I didn't just co-sign a piece of paper and disappear. I structured it the way I structure fleet risk for a living because it was the only way to get him approved fast, and because some quiet, tired part of me had learned not to leave anything unprotected around my father. The lease went through my company's small fleet program. The vehicle title, the lease agreement, and the commercial insurance policy were all issued in my name and under my employer's fleet umbrella, with Gerald Ridley listed as the designated operator. He drove it. He used it every day. He called it his truck in every sentence he ever said about it. It was never his truck. Not on paper. Not for one single day. I never brought it up. It didn't seem like something worth fighting about. He needed a truck, I could get him one, and some part of me, I'll admit this, liked being the invisible reason things kept working for a man who never once said thank you and meant it. That Sunday, my own car was in the shop for a recall repair. So I drove his truck, my truck, to the cookout. The toast happened around 4:15. My uncle raced it up with a beer and said the thing uncles say at these events, something about fathers and legacies, and then he turned it over to my dad, the way you'd hand a man a microphone at his own retirement party. My father stood. He talked about the business. He talked about Dustin and the edition Dustin had framed solo last month, and how proud he was to watch a real Ridley man carry the company forward. 20 faces nodded along. I clapped when everyone else clapped, because that's what you do. Then someone, I still don't know who, and it doesn't matter, said, "What about Caleb? Doesn't he do something with insurance now?"
My father looked at me.
Really looked, for maybe the first time all day. "Caleb," he said, like he was testing the shape of my name, "pushes paper for a living and drives a truck he didn't pay for." A few people laugh the uncomfortable laugh people laugh when they're not sure if it's a joke. I built something with my hands. I don't know what he's building. Some spreadsheet, I guess. He took a drink. "I'll be honest with you all, because it's Father's Day, and I figure that's the day you're supposed to say the true thing. I never wanted a son like him. I wanted somebody who'd carry this forward. Instead, I got somebody who explains insurance policies at Thanksgiving." The yard went quiet in the particular way a yard goes quiet when 20 people all realize at the same moment that something has gone somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. Nobody moved. My parents divorced when I was 19, but she still comes to these things for my sake, put her hand flat against her chest, the way she does when she's bracing for something. Dustin looked down at his plate like it had suddenly become very interesting. Even Aunt Denise, who talks through everything, stopped with a serving spoon halfway to the beans. I felt my face go still in the specific way it always went still when my father said something like this. Not shock, not exactly, because none of it was new. What was new was the audience. He had said versions of the sentence to me alone in kitchens and trucks and once in a hospital waiting room for 17 years. He had never said it to 20 people holding paper plates. I set my plate down on the table next to Aunt Denise's beans. I stood up. Then stop pretending you have one, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I want that understood because I know how these stories usually get told. Someone screams, someone throws something, someone storms off in tears. That is not what happened. I said 8 words in the same tone I used to explain a coverage exclusion to a client, and then I walked to the truck, got in, and drove away from my father's Father's Day cookout, while 20 of his friends and family watched him stand there holding a beer he'd forgotten to drink. I want to tell you, I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt the specific, hollow calm of a man who has just said out loud a thing he's been carrying silently for 17 years. I was 3 miles down Route 9, my hands loose on a steering wheel that had never legally belonged to the man I'd just left standing in his yard, when my phone buzzed. Dad, bring my truck back, or I'm calling the police. I read it twice. Then I did something I am not proud of, and something I would do again without hesitating. I smiled. Go ahead. I didn't explain anything. I didn't say it's not your truck, it never was, check the registration in the glove box sometime. I just drove home, parked the truck in my own driveway, the driveway of the house I own, under a mortgage that has my name on it and nobody else's, and went inside to make coffee. I want to walk you through what I understood, sitting at my kitchen table with that coffee going cold, because I think it matters that you know I wasn't guessing. I do this for a living. I know exactly what happens when a truck gets reported stolen to a small-town police department. The plate gets run. The registration comes back. And when it comes back to a commercial fleet policy under my employer's name, with me listed as the responsible party and lien holder, and Gerald Ridley listed, correctly, accurately, and not at all how he'd describe it to a dispatcher, as an authorized operator, not an owner. A man cannot report a vehicle stolen that legally belongs to someone else and was, at the moment of the alleged theft, being driven by that legal owner. What he can do is file a false police report. In Ohio, that's a misdemeanor. In a county where the sheriff's department already had 2 open files on Ridley and Sons, because I'd know, given what I do, it was about to become a very inconvenient afternoon for my father. Around 6, my phone rang. It was Priya, a colleague from the fleet compliance desk who I'd worked with for 4 years and trusted more than almost anyone in my family. She'd seen an automated flag come through on the account, a law enforcement records request against a vehicle under her book of business, and she was calling, half out of procedure and half out of friendship, to ask if everything was all right. It's fine, I told her. It's my dad. He thinks the truck is his. Is it? No, I said. It's never been his. It's just been his to drive. She was quiet for a second. You want me to flag anything on our end? Pull the file, get ahead of it. No, I said. Let it run exactly the way it's supposed to run. I'm not going to protect him from his own paperwork. I meant it as a statement about a truck. Sitting with the phone still warm against my ear after we hung up, I understood it was really a statement about the last 17 years. I didn't call anyone else. I didn't tip anyone off. I sat at my table and drank my coffee and let the truth do what the truth does when nobody's protecting a man from it anymore. Here is the part one only pieced together afterward, from my cousin Dustin, who was still at the house when it happened, and from the report itself, which I requested a copy of 2 weeks later because, old habits, I wanted to see the paperwork. At 5:52 p.m., my father called the Millhaven Township non-emergency line and reported his F-250 stolen by his son. The dispatcher took his information, ran the plate through leads while he was still on the phone, and came back with something that made her pause. Registered owner, a commercial fleet entity under Heartland Trade Insurance Group. Primary lien holder, same. Insured operator of record, Caleb J. Ridley. Designated secondary operator, Gerald W. Ridley. The vehicle had not been stolen. The vehicle had been driven away by the person whose name was on every single document that mattered. That, on its own, might have ended with a deputy calling my father back and telling him, politely, that this was a civil matter and not a police matter, and to have a good evening. It didn't end there because of what the dispatcher's routine check turned up next, sitting right there in the same system, attached to the same address. 2 things. First, an open code enforcement referral from 4 months earlier, when a homeowner 2 streets over had reported Ridley and Sons for operating a work crew on her property without a certificate of insurance on file, a claim my father had waved off at the time, telling the inspector his insurance was handled, which, in the narrowest and most technical sense, had been true for exactly one vehicle, and only because I'd handled it for him without telling anybody, including him, exactly how thin. That coverage was for the rest of his operation. Second, an outstanding bench warrant, 6 weeks old, for Gerald Ridley's failure to appear at a hearing tied to that same code enforcement complaint. Not a serious offense. Not the kind of thing that ends in handcuffs on the evening news. The kind of thing that, once a deputy is already standing in your driveway because you called them yourself, becomes very difficult to keep quiet about, especially in a town of 4,000 people, where the volunteer fire department's scanner runs in the break room of the diner on Main Street. 3 patrol units rolled up outside my father's house at 6:47 that evening, 1 to close out the false report call, and 2 more because dispatch, seeing the open warrant flagged against an active address, sent back up as a matter of routine. Dustin was still there when it happened, helping fold up chairs, and he told me later that the first car pulled in slow, no lights, the way a deputy rolls up when he's expecting a conversation and not a chase. My father met the officer in the driveway already talking, already explaining about the truck, about his son, about how this whole thing was a misunderstanding that would clear itself up in 5 minutes if somebody would just listen to him. The deputy listened. Then he read back, from a laptop mounted in his cruiser, the same 3 lines I'd already worked out at my kitchen table: registered owner, lien holder, insured operator. In the flat, unhurried voice cops use when they already know how a conversation is going to end and are simply walking the other person to that ending themselves. My father's version of the story had a hole in it exactly the shape of a title he'd never once asked to see. That was supposed to be the whole visit. It would have been, Dustin said, if the second car hadn't pulled in about 90 seconds later and then a third right behind it. Not because the situation had gotten dangerous, but because the system had already done what systems do once a name gets typed into it. The warrant flag doesn't care that a man is standing in his own driveway holding a paper plate of leftover potato salad. It just surfaces, and once it surfaces, protocol takes over from politeness. Dustin said my father went very quiet, the way I'd gone quiet in that same yard 3 hours earlier, except his kind of quiet had nothing calm in it. My father had called the police to get a truck back that was never his, on a day he'd stood in his own backyard and told a crowd of people he never wanted a son like me. And the truck he called them about led, in less than an hour, to 3 patrol cars parked outside his house, while half of Millhaven watched from their porches to see what Gerald Ridley had gotten himself into now. I didn't drive back. I didn't need to. Dustin called me around 8 that night, his voice doing the thing voices do when someone's trying to sound casual about something that clearly rattled them. Cops were here, he said. 3 of them. Your dad's freaking out. About the truck? About the truck, and Caleb, did you know he's got a warrant? For missing some kind of court thing? I hadn't known the specifics. I'd known, in the vague way you know things about a man who's spent 30 years cutting corners on paperwork he considers beneath him, that there was probably something out there. I hadn't gone looking for it. I didn't need to. The truth doesn't need help. It just needs somebody to stop covering for it. He's telling everybody it's a misunderstanding, Dustin said. That the truck thing is some kind of insurance mix-up. It's not a mix-up, I said. It's just the truck. It was always mine. There was a long pause on the line. The whole time. Dustin didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he's gonna lose the Hutchins job. The county job. They pulled his bid this afternoon after somebody from the inspector's office called about the insurance thing. Word travels fast around here. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd have predicted 9 years ago, if you'd told me this day was coming. I felt something quieter. Something closer to grief for a version of this that never had to happen. A version where my father just said thank you one time and meant it, and none of this was ever necessary because there was nothing underneath it that needed protecting from the light. I set my coffee cup in the sink, and I said nothing for a while. I looked at the window instead. The consequences didn't stop at the driveway. Beat 1. The Hutchins County contract, a $178,000 addition and garage build for the township's new maintenance facility, the biggest single job Ridley and Sons had bid on in 3 years, was pulled the following Tuesday, once the county's risk office confirmed the certificate of insurance on file covered exactly one vehicle out of the 4 Ridley and Sons operated, and that vehicle's actual owner was not the man who'd signed the bid. Beat 2. Two of my father's longtime subcontractors, men who'd worked with him for over a decade, who'd been at that cookout, who'd heard him call me a spreadsheet in front of everyone, quietly stopped returning his calls that week. Small towns don't gossip loudly. They just get very, very slow to call you back. I heard about the diner from Dustin too. Millhaven has exactly one place everybody eats breakfast, the Wagon Wheel, on Main, 2 doors down from the hardware store, and for most of that week, my father's booth in the back corner sat empty at the hour he usually held court there. Not because anyone said anything cruel to his face. Small towns are more efficient than that. People just found reasons to sit somewhere else, and a man who has spent 3 decades needing a room to notice him finds out very quickly what it feels like when a room quietly decides not to. The family group chat, which normally exists to share church bulletin announcements and pictures of somebody's dog, went almost silent for 4 days and then erupted all at once on a Thursday night, after somebody, I still don't know who, finally typed out loud what everyone had apparently been saying in private texts to each other all week. That maybe a man who'd spent 30 years telling his son he wasn't wanted shouldn't be surprised when that son stopped catching him every time he fell. Aunt Denise liked the message. So did 2 cousins who hadn't spoken to me directly in years. Nobody defended my father in the thread. Not one person. I read it standing in my kitchen, and it did something to me I hadn't expected, not vindication exactly. Just the quiet relief of finding out I hadn't imagined any of it. Beat 3. 3 weeks later, my father needed a truck. Not mine, I'd already had it transferred out of the fleet program and traded in, a clean, unemotional phone call to my own office that took 11 minutes. He needed a truck, and his credit, still bruised, still thin, meant no dealership in a 40-mile radius would finance him without a guarantor. He asked Dustin to ask me. I said no. I didn't say it cruelly. I said it the way you decline a claim that doesn't meet policy terms, plainly, once, without apology, and without cruelty either. Tell him I hope it works out. I'm not signing for anything else.
My father called me himself in late July.
It was the first time he'd called, not texted, not routed through Dustin, in longer than I could remember. I heard what you said, he told me. Not I never wanted a son like you. He meant the 8 words I'd said back. Then stop pretending you have one. I meant it, I said. I know, he said, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard directed at me since I was maybe 11 years old. Not an apology, not yet, but the sound of a man doing arithmetic he'd avoided for 3 decades. The truck was really yours the whole time?
For 2 years, I said.
I never brought it up because I didn't think it mattered to you where the paperwork lived. I just wanted you to have a truck. He was quiet for a long moment. You could have told me. I could have, I said. I didn't think you'd want to know it came from me. You've never wanted anything to come from me.
He didn't argue with that.
That, more than anything else, is how I knew something had actually shifted, not fixed, not healed, just shifted, the way a foundation settles after you finally stop pretending the crack in it isn't there. I'm going to fight the warrant thing, he said after a while. Lawyer says it's fixable. Missed paperwork, mostly. A pause. The county job's probably gone though. Probably, I said. I didn't offer to help. 2 years ago, I would have already been 3 steps into fixing it before he finished the sentence. I let it sit there instead, his problem, in his hands, where it had always technically belonged. You're not going to help with that either, he said. It wasn't quite a question. No, I said. Okay, he said, and I heard something in the word that wasn't quite acceptance yet, but wasn't the old flat dismissal either. Just a man setting down something heavy because his arms had finally given out. We didn't reconcile that phone call. I want to be honest with you about that because I don't think this is a story about a father who suddenly became a different man. It's a story about a son who stopped quietly holding up a version of his father that his father had never earned. My Aunt Denise called me a week after that. She's the one who was standing closest to my father at the cookout, the one who watched the whole thing happen from 4 feet away. You know, she said, your father spent 30 years telling everybody what kind of son he wanted. I don't think he ever once asked what kind of son he actually had. She wasn't defending him. She said it the way you'd name a pattern out loud for the first time, and it landed the way those lines always land, quiet, certain, not needing anything added to it. People who need you to be small, I told her, don't usually recover well from finding out you weren't. She laughed, short and a little sad. No, she said. I don't suppose they do. You know what gets me, she went on. 31 years he's had that shop. 31 years of Father's Days, birthdays, Christmases. And the one thing I've never once heard him do, not one single time, is ask you what you actually wanted to be. He just told everybody, over and over, what you weren't. I didn't have an answer for that one. I still don't, not really. Some questions aren't asking for an answer. They're just asking to be heard out loud, finally, by somebody who already knows. I want to tell you something because I think it's the real reason I'm telling you this story at all. Setting a boundary is not the same thing as cruelty. For 17 years, I confused the two. I thought loving my father meant absorbing whatever he said about me and converting it quietly into more effort, more help, more invisible fixing, like if I could just be useful enough. Eventually, he'd revise the verdict he'd handed down about me before I was old enough to object to it. He never did. Men like my father don't revise verdicts. They just wait for you to stop appealing. You can love someone and still refuse to keep collapsing into the shape they've decided you are. Love was never supposed to be a blank check written against your own name, cashed by someone who never once said thank you for the balance. The people who actually see you, who saw what I built before there was ever any proof of it, who never needed a headline or a truck or a $178,000 county contract to know I wasn't the son my father described in that backyard. Those people are more my family than blood alone ever made anyone. Biology is just a fact. Being chosen is something else entirely. And walking out of that yard wasn't bitterness. I want to be clear about that too, because I know how it might read from the outside. It was the only response that made any sense. You cannot keep growing in a room that was built to keep you small, no matter how many Father's Days you spend standing in it, holding a paper plate, waiting for a verdict that was never going to change. There's one more thing I've had to sit with, and it's the least comfortable one. For years I told myself that quietly fixing things for my father, the loan, the truck, the 1,000 small rescues nobody ever knew about, was generosity. It wasn't, not entirely. Some of it was fear, dressed up as love. Fear that if I ever stopped being useful to him, there'd be nothing left connecting us at all. Real peace didn't arrive when I helped him one more time. It arrived the day I found out I could stop, and the world, my world at least, didn't end. The silence in my house that night, no cookout noise, no relatives, no eyes checking to see how I'd absorb the next comment, was an emptiness. It was the first quiet I'd had in years that didn't cost me anything to keep. I still think about the exact moment my father set his beer down on the porch rail, both hands free, ready to say the thing he'd apparently been building toward for longer than I knew. He thought he was delivering a verdict. He never imagined it was the last time he'd get to hand one down to me without me handing something back. I'll ask you honestly, because I think you already know the answer if you've made it this far. If you've been standing in that yard, holding your own paper plate, watching a man you'd spent your whole life trying to earn something from finally say the quiet part out loud in front of everyone, would you have stayed seated and eaten the rest of your burger? Or would you have stood up too? The story you just heard was inspired by real experiences shared on public platforms including Reddit and other online communities. It has been thoughtfully adapted and reimagined for storytelling purposes. All characters, situations, names, and settings are fictional, altered, or generated using AI tools. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is entirely coincidental and unintentional. This story was created to deliver positive messages, emotional insight, and meaningful reflection, not to represent or defame any real person or situation. Asterisk.